All right. Hello, everybody. My name's Nicole Goldfarb, and I'm the host of Airway Answers, expanding your breadth of knowledge through Airway Circle Radio. And I'm here today with Dr. Bill Hang. I'm so excited to be able to speak with you, Dr. Hang. You don't even know, I just saw you yesterday on another interview that you did with someone else, and I kind of see you all the time. so great.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, we really appreciate you spending this time with us. We have so many great questions for you and just a lot to learn from you. So let me read your bio before we get started. Probably everybody here already knows you, Dr. Hang. So, but Dr. Hang did graduate from the University of Illinois College of Dentistry and the University of Minnesota Orthodontic program, where you briefly taught orthodontics. And then after about 7 years of having a traditional orthodontic practice, Dr. Hang became dissatisfied with the faces he was producing and set out to learn and develop techniques that would produce the best facial balance. Dr. Hang then became aware of the significant positive effects some of his treatments had on the airway, and this opened up a whole new aspect of orthodontics that really, to add to your bio, changed the life of probably so many people, not only your patients, but practicing orthodontists and dentists around the world. You really started this trend that's changing people's lives. This new aspect of orthodontics was to maximize the airway for all orthodontic patients, and specifically treating patients with sleep disordered breathing or obstructive sleep apnea. And we all know Dr. Hang's a huge proponent of myofunctional therapy, and I just love that aspect too. And you'll talk a little bit more about that today, but you talk about myofunctional therapy being the basis for good orofacial growth and development, and we all appreciate that so much here. Dr. Hang has lectured locally, nationally, and internationally, and received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the AAPMD for his work on optimizing the airway in patients of all ages. Passionate about teaching others about the benefits of Ortho2 Health, pronounced Ortho2 Health, I have to make sure I get that right, Ortho2 Health, which I just learned more about the other day through the AAPMD, where the airway is always the first consideration. Dr. Hang has launched 2 memberships: the Hang Echo, the Early Childhood Health-Centered Orthodontic Mentorship, and the Hang ERRS, Extraction, Retraction, Regret Syndrome. I tell people about that all the time. Orthodontic mentorship. So at one point today, you'll tell us all about those as well. But welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. And for me, you are one of the most influential airway people in my life. You probably don't know, but I actually met you in 2008 at my first course. Yep. Introduction to Myofunctional Therapy in 2008 at Leacha Pasque's office. In like Westwood, somewhere in LA, and it was taught by Joy Moeller, Barbara Green, Leacha Pasquet, and there was about maybe 10 of us taking the course around a big round table, and you came and did a lecture, and that just had a huge impression on me. And back then, I didn't really know about airway, and that wasn't even the focus so much, or the thought, at least in myofunctional therapy, right? It was orthodontic cases, and as a speech therapist, patients with a lisp, and why aren't they getting better? And your lecture was talking about facial balance and breathing, and it just stuck with me forever. And then years later, when I got to meet you in person, and I'm like, wow, I completely remember that lecture, that first course to myofunctional therapy. So I thank you for being there from the beginning.
Thank you. I'm glad it's been helpful to you.
Yes. So let's talk about your history and how you got started in the airway field.
Well, really, you have to understand, when I was in orthodontic training, we didn't discuss it at all. It was all about teeth, straightening teeth. As a matter of fact, I did not learn on a lateral head x-ray where the adenoids were until 1982, which was literally 10 years after I had started the orthodontic program at the University of Minnesota. And I did that in Detroit, Michigan, at a course that I went to. And I had no reason to be concerned because, it didn't matter. I was straightening teeth. But here we were transitioning, talking about airway and its implications. And really, unfortunately for most people, even today, that's what the focus is. Gee, does somebody have large adenoids and or tonsils? And, let's clear that out, and that'll going to fix the problem, which is absolutely not the case, as we all know. But it started back then, and that was a major focus then. But really, what really got me into it was about 1992, about 10 years later. I had a woman, I was practicing in Vermont at the time. I've been in California now for almost 26 years. But I was practicing in Vermont, and I had a woman who had a significant pain pattern, a TMJ issue. And she had driven a couple of hours past a whole bunch of orthodontists to see me. They'd all wanted to take out teeth, and I was going to use something to posture her jaw forward. I was going to expand her jaw and do that. And I got her out of pain with an appliance that held her jaw forward. And it was interesting because she couldn't get to my office because honestly, she was in her mid 30s, and her husband was a logger, and she did not have a driver's license. I'm not joking. It's the truth. Her husband was going to bring her. It was in the middle of winter, and it was a good time to be working in the woods. So she broke her appliance. It was more than 2 weeks before she got in to see me. She comes in and she's really unhappy. She's like desperate. And I looked at her and said, "What's the problem?" She says, "Well, I didn't tell you this, but before I started treatment with you, I was ready to kill myself. And when you had the appliance in, bringing my jaw forward, I felt so good. I could breathe and everything was great. But when it broke, my jaw fell back and I thought it was going to drown or choke to death." And I thought, wow, what did she just say? So then I went and looked at a lateral head x-ray. And I looked at where the airway was because I knew where the airway was, but I had no idea how big it should be. So I called up the surgeon that I used for doing orthodontic surgery cases, and I asked him what the norm was. And he says, "Well, it's about 10 to 11 millimeters." And I said, "Wow, this is about 3 to 4. And the light bulb went off right then. And now that is literally about the first thing I look at on every x-ray. And it's taken over my whole life. And I have to owe it to that one woman and her comments and listening to what she said. And then I had to interpret what that really meant. So it's been everything I do now is really based on that.
And that kind of changed the way you treat. So before that point, were you not like so aware about airway? And I know you said you maybe did extractions in the past. Yeah, how was that?
I was aware of it, but the big deal back in the 80s was not to take out teeth and not to devastate the face. The face would look better if you hadn't taken out teeth. Now, in the 70s, I had more than half my patients that had teeth taken out until I realized what it was doing to the face. And then I said, I can't do this. I have to stop. And it was a very uncomfortable time in my life, to be honest, very, very uncomfortable because I was starting to treat without removing teeth, and I didn't know how it was going to work out or not. I'd been told that you'd push the teeth off the bone support, that people might lose teeth and all this stuff. I mean, I was married to my wife for 11 years, and I knew I had to take out teeth to treat her. And finally, I wasn't going to do it. Finally, after 11 years, she was an experiment for me. I treated her without removing teeth, and she still has teeth, amazingly, 40 years later. We've been married soon to be 51 years. But the point is, it was all about not taking out teeth and facial balance. When you then began to understand that, for instance, the patients who had temporomandibular joint problems, virtually every one of them has an airway problem too. It's the flip side of the TMJ coin. And so you have to address the airway, and unless and until you do, the pain pattern, that you're really probably never going to get rid of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't realize. So in the 80s, extractions became less popular.
A little bit. There was a general dentist teaching other dentists to do orthodontics. And of course, you understand that most orthodontists, they have their turf war, and they believe they are the only people that can and should straighten teeth. And I was one of those people way back then. I am absolutely not that now. But this dentist was doing courses, probably had 35 courses, weekends a year at various places in North America. He spent his time in an airplane teaching general dentists and motel courses to do ortho. And his allegations were this: number one, the orthodontists are wrecking faces, and number two, they're producing TMJ problems. So when I first saw these flyers coming, this was long before the internet, I was not happy. I thought, who is this clown from Minneapolis, Minnesota? And I had my residency there, and I never heard of him. But I had a couple friends of mine say, "Bill, you really need to go hear this guy." So I did. And it was the right thing at the right time. And I'd had enough experience to understand, wait a minute, there is something to this. He's not some crazy guy. there's a lot to this. And I'm the one who prior to that, I thought I knew everything. Now I realize I'm the one who has so much to learn. And once you get to that point and realize everything that you were taught is not necessarily the gospel, then you open the door to more change. And to be honest, it can be very, very, very uncomfortable. And I must admit, I had my times where I really didn't know if I wanted to continue living back in the mid 80s, because I had guilt about the patients I'd taken teeth out on, didn't know what was going to happen for the ones that I was literally trying to, treat without removing teeth. And I lived in a small town where what you do gets home before you get home. Everybody knows what you do. And if it's successful, that's great. But if it's unsuccessful, then you might as well pack your bags and leave town, because you're done. The practice flourished. I had people coming from all over the state of Vermont, and I was known not affectionately by the other orthodontists as that guy who doesn't take out teeth. And all the general dentists loved it because they liked it better and they liked what they saw. But I was not exactly a good guy amongst the orthodontists.
Mm. So how did you learn the techniques I know you said, are the teeth going to be pushed out of the bone? What do you do? So how did you learn the techniques to expand?
Well, I learned from some other people, some appliances to use when there was crowding, and indeed you could create the space. I did so for one boy whose sister had 100% crowding for upper eye teeth and lower eye teeth. The girl, in the first year or two of my practice, I took 4 bicuspids out on, and the boy, I used some appliances, created spaces, and I brought all his eye teeth in, and he had a big, huge, broad smile. It was lovely. And when I compared it to his sister, I felt total guilt. So once you see that it can work, even though you were told that something was going to happen, and that's it. You're told that something is likely to happen. Nobody ever showed you, not even one case, where someone treated the case without removing teeth, and gum recession happened and our teeth were lost. The other issue was, the case will be more stable if you don't take out teeth, or if you do take out teeth, rather. And yet there's not one article in the refereed literature that shows that, never has been and never will be. I honestly believe they're less stable, because what you do by retracting is you decrease the tongue space, and the tongue doesn't go away. The tongue is like a balloon. It's a constant volume, and you can push on it here, you can push on it there, but it's just going to displace. And the place that it gets displaced to is into your throat. Or then you have to posture your tongue between the posterior teeth, and that is not great, because over time you can see those teeth, the back teeth will stay at a certain level and the front teeth will over erupt. This can produce premature contacts in the front. And this then causes the lower jaw to get pushed back. And that's when the fun begins, when the pressure in the jaw joint starts to happen and the clicking and popping happens in the joints. And so you have temporomandibular joint problems. And of course, there's huge, huge controversy in this profession about whether or not orthodontics has anything to do with that. That's a subject for a whole discussion in and of itself. So I won't get into that.
Yeah. Right. Some might find that controversial, but probably most of us wouldn't. I know there's usually a problem there to begin with, and the orthodontic should make the issue better and resolved versus keeping it the same or making it worse. I'm a product of a headgear as a child, and I know I'm sure I had issues before, having a class 2 malocclusion, behavioral issues, like looking back.
Right.
And the headgear, I'm sure, only made things worse. So,
right. What you have to understand is you're young enough that even at that point in your life, the profession has known that the upper teeth really don't stick out. In 1981, there was an article in a journal which basically said, in a class 2 case like you were, if the upper teeth are not ideally positioned, they're more likely to be too far back than too far forward. And the conclusions of that article said, well, you need to try to do treatment to develop the lower jaw forward, which I completely concur with. If you really understand what's going on, however, in the class 2 cases, they are always, and I use that term, always the upper teeth are too far back, always. And what you really need to do is to move the upper jaw forward and the lower jaw forward, which sadly is not easy. And it's not even, I don't believe that it's possible to do so in an adolescent, which is why I'm passionate about treating earlier and earlier and earlier. And my new ECHO, early childhood health centered orthodontics mentorship, is going to focus on treating age 6 and under, prior to even the first permanent tooth being in the mouth.
That's amazing. That is exactly what's needed because, as you're saying, as we get older, these things only become harder to treat. And the brain damage that occurs from the poor sleep quality is, we don't know what's reversible. It's just, and as the children get older and the behavioral issues get worse from this buildup of poor quality sleep, well, they're less tolerant to the orthodontic treatments as well. How are you going to get some of these treatments to work with children who are just hyperactive and non-compliant? Which leads me to ask you, can you talk about the orthodontic treatments that you do, describing what is orthotropics, BioBlock orthotropics, and the different treatments you do?
Okay. Back in the 1980s, there were many people in the country, mainly general dentists, taught by this man from John Witzig from Minneapolis, Minnesota, who were using so-called functional appliances to develop the lower jaw forward. And I was one of the participants in that. And there were some people in the orthodontic community, James McNamara from Michigan, who was advocating these. And I began using these appliances, and I was thinking, okay, fine, I am developing the lower jaw forward. This is great. But the sad part is when you posture the lower jaw forward into another appliance, the lower jaw wants to pull back. And so you've hooked the upper and lower jaws together. So with the muscles of the lower jaw pulling back on the appliance, which is hooked onto the upper jaw, you really get what we call a headgear effect. The same thing as if you wore a headgear as you did, you're going to retard the growth of the upper jaw and effectively over time bring it back, which is exactly what you do not want. So that's so-called functional appliances. And there are many people who are still using them. The Bionator, the Orthopedic Correct. I use the Frankel appliance on my two boys who are now 46 and 44, and I have to apologize to one of them that I used it on for how silly it was and how awful it was. But so over the years, I learned that really didn't work well. The Herbst appliance was a classic one, and I was one of the first to start using it after I heard about it in October of 1982, again in Detroit, Michigan. I thought it was growing the lower jaw. Little did I know that it has a huge headgear effect. And honestly, I later on did some research on my own and saw how much reduction in the airway there was. So orthotropics, I came onto this because I met John Mew from London, England in March of 1990. And here was this very proper British gentleman with a great British accent, which means you got to believe he knows something when you have an accent like that. But I was amazed at the faces that I saw. And I called my wife on the phone, on a payphone, remember those things. And I said, he's going to give a course in London in October. We're going to go. We got to go. So I took my kids out of school and took my wife and my kids. We went to London. And I took this course, and I was literally blown away by the faces that he was producing as he literally developed the upper jaw forward, as this article in 1981 said, where the upper jaw was too far back. So here's this guy who develops the upper jaw forward. And then, lo and behold, he develops the lower jaw forward as well and negates the headgear effect because he has an appliance which has some extensions to go to the floor of the mouth. And if the lower jaw falls back against it, it doesn't feel good. And so the patient learns to not rest the lower jaw on that appliance. He learns to hold the jaw forward in that position. And the whole premise of the treatment is the jaw will grow into the position it's held in the most time. So what you're really trying to do is correct the rest oral posture, have the teeth together lightly, the tongue firmly to the palate and lips together without strain. You do that long enough, and lo and behold, the face then grows there. And I began doing this. It's not easy to do. It's not easy for me. It's not easy for the patients, but I learned it. I have all my battle scars to show for it. And then about the year 2000, I was looking at lateral head x-rays, which I'd taken before and after the treatment. And I was literally blown away by the improvement in the airway, which just boggled the mind. It was a casual observation that I looked at, and I saw some dramatic improvements. I mean, huge improvements, and others that were not so big. And then I did a study, or I had it done. I didn't do it myself. Someone else did it and wrote up the article. And we showed, even with the good cooperators versus the bad cooperators, all of them lumped together, because that's the way science is. You can't pick can't cherry pick and take the best ones and say, oh, this is the way it is. No, you take everything. So you average out the ones who cooperated and might have got a good result, and those who didn't do a darn thing, and they drag the average down. So we saw an improvement at the dorsum of the palate, about 31%, 23% at the angle of the mandible, and clear down in the laryngopharynx area, a 9% improvement. That blew me away. And I've shown these data to ENT specialists and some of the biggest names in sleep, and that they're just like, we're kidding. Wow, that's great. This is the super stuff. That then made me open the door to say, well, so what's happening when you take out teeth? What's happening when you use headgears? What's happening when you use Herbst appliances that have this retractive effect? And I won't go into all the details, but I went to an orthodontic meeting and I measured a lot of pre and post treatment x-rays. And I found out, basically doing some very rudimentary calculations, this was not scientific in any way, but I saw that no longer would I had quit taking out teeth for plenty of years by that time, because it was the year 2001 when I actually did that. And I had stopped taking out teeth in 1982 or so. So all of this put together made me come up, and I treat a ton of what I politely call train wreck patients, those who've been retracted and have these long list of symptoms, including pain and all kinds of sleep issues, and every behavioral issue you want to know. I mean, depression, people who are ready to commit suicide. I mean, I treat these people, and it became obvious to me that anything I would do to increase their airway was a good thing. And sometimes the most minute little change, someone would come in and say to me, oh my gosh, my wife says I'm not snoring. And I'm saying, you're kidding, I barely moved your teeth. And who am I to say your wife is lying to you? No, I believe the patients when they report these kinds of things. And so pretty soon, you learn from your patients. And that's what I'm proudest of, is how much I've learned over the last 40 years by sitting down and shutting up and listening to my patients, because they know more about themselves than I ever could. And I just have to translate that into, what does it all mean and how can I help them? So that's why I have a philosophy, and we came up with the ortho to health with the O2 in the middle, which really stands for trying to develop everything forward and never, ever, ever, ever even minutely retracting at all in any way.
Okay. This is really good. I have so many questions. The orthotropics, it's called BioBlock Orthotropics. Is that
right?
correct?
Orthotropics just really is John Mew's term for correct growth, and BioBlock is the appliance which he calls his appliance that. In reality, the orthotropics is a philosophy. It's a philosophy of why do faces fall back in the first place. And John goes into great detail to document that. And there's so much out there to learn on that. I mean, it goes back to many years ago. I mean, into the 1800s, George Catlin was a Philadelphia lawyer who became an artist and a photographer and lived in the American West. And he became very comfortable and knew the Native Americans very well. He's got tons of, you go online and you see his pictures, they're amazing artists. But he noted that the Native Americans had their lips together. They slept with their lips together. When the mother took the child off the nipple, the mother would make sure that she took the fingers and made sure that the lips closed, and the baby didn't hang her mouth open. And of course, they're all sleeping outside and whatever the weather is. And kids that George Catlin were familiar with were, even in the early 1800s, were sleeping indoors, often in a heated room, and most of them had their mouths hanging open. And he made this impassioned book entitled, I love this title, "Shut Your Mouth and Save Your Life." Well, you can get that for $13 off of Amazon. That and Weston Price's book, which people are usually familiar with, about what we eat and how and all that. And how that changed the faces in one generation. Then you go to Daniel Lieberman's book. He's a Harvard anthropologist. You go to that book and see how our faces are back from our ancestors. And if you realize your upper jaw's back, your lower jaw's back, your soft palate's back, your tongue's back. And that's why we have, this airway pandemic. And that's what it is. Unfortunately, we're just now becoming aware of it. We're in our infancy, really, even now in realizing this.
Yeah, I like that. Shut your mouth, save your life. Renata, who's in charge of Airway Circle, likes to make T-shirts and mugs. I can see that being like the next T-shirt, right?
It should be. And if you read the book, it's entertaining. But if you want to, if you get offended by something that's not politically correct, he calls we call them today Native Americans. When I was a kid, we called them Indians, but he calls them savages in the 1800s. In reality, they're more civilized than we are, and they're healthier than the Caucasians were. And that's the lesson. As we've been industrialized, we're now in worse shape than the people who are not industrialized.
Yeah, it's really interesting looking at the whole microevolution, how everything changes due to diet and allergens and all of those various factors. In terms of the patients that you treat, do you think most of them are sleep breathing airway cases? Is that the majority of what you focus on?
When I started orthodontics, literally in June of this year, will make 50 years. All I saw was teeth, and I wasn't aware of the other stuff. Now, I mean, I know there were issues back in those days that I was just blind to, but we're dealing with a different population today. We really are, and I mean, there's no question about it. In 50 years, what's changed? But more than that, I've changed, and I know the right questions to ask. And when you start asking those questions, you realize that there's hardly anyone who comes into an orthodontic office. Anyone, they have a problem. They all do, or they wouldn't be there. They all have their face back to some degree. If their faces were forward, if they had their teeth together, their tongue to the palate, their lips together, or breathing through their nose, they'll never see me because their face will grow forward, their airway will be lovely, and their teeth will come in. They'll have a gorgeous smile, and if they're a female, they can be on the cover of Vogue magazine. They'll look so good. And if they're a male, they're probably a good athlete too. I mean, not that girls can't be athletes too, but people with their faces forward are the athletes. Go look at the people who just won the Boston Marathon. I mean, I'm a runner, and I was supposed to be there, run it for the 11th time, but I wasn't, for reasons I'm not going to tell you. At any rate, look at the people who win. There's not one with a narrow smile. They all have these unbelievably broad smiles with well-developed cheeks, and their faces are forward. They're not also, very few are from this country. They come from Africa. They come from mainly Kenya and Ethiopia. And I joke around that someday I'm going to be there on Boylston Street, right past the finish line, with my cone beam x-ray machine.
Yes.
And as soon as the winner comes across, after they put the thing on their head, they're going to sit in my x-ray machine, and I'm going to see what their airway looks like. I'm going to look, and I'll measure their intermolar width.
Oh my gosh, you have to do that. It'd be such a great research study. Seriously. Oh, yeah. I wonder, because I remember, I don't know if I was reading a book or where it was, but certain groups would train actually barefoot and with water in their mouth. Runners, right? They would hold water in their mouth to ensure nose breathing. Did you hear that?
I've heard of that, but okay. I didn't run Boston on Monday for some reasons. Okay. I don't want to tell it. I don't want to publicize why, but a week from tomorrow, I'm going to run a marathon in Tacoma, Washington. They'll be my 33rd.
Wow.
And I've decided to run it with my mouth taped. Okay. Because I've run 33 marathons, and I run 19 with my mouth hanging open. And then I heard Patrick McCune speak many years ago, and I started taping my mouth at night. Now I've gone 3 years without a cold because of taping, 3 full years as of February because I tape at night. But more than that, when I heard him speak, I decided, I'm going to learn to run with my lips together. And so I went out and run a few hundred yards and have to blow my nose because my nose was clogged up. Within a few weeks, I'm realizing I'm not blowing my nose. My nose actually works for the purpose it was meant for. And then I'll really share the next thing with you, just for you to really understand how crazy this is and how much a slow learner I am. So James Nestor's book, Breath, everybody's got to read that. came out 2 years ago. And I'm reading it, and he's talking about running in Golden Gate Park and holding his breath on the exhale. So I decide, wait a minute, that's it. I'm dumb. I haven't really understood the whole thing here. So I decided, I had been running with 3 strides in and 2 strides out for all these years. I decided I was breathing way too much. And so I went 3 strides in and then 3 strides out, and did that for a few weeks. Then 3 strides in and 4 strides out. Then 3 strides in and 5 strides out. I'd actually exhale for 3 strides and then just hold my breath.
Okay.
So when I qualified for Boston last June, I ran a marathon, 3 strides in, 3 strides out, and held my breath for 9 breaths. So I'm literally breathing once every 15 strides versus once every 5 strides.
The entire marathon. This was how you ran?
Yes,
Oh my
26
God.
miles with breathing once every 15 strides versus once every 5. Now, if you'd have said before I tried to do this, I was going to somehow do this, I would say you're nuts. It can't be done. And don't think I'm some star athlete. I'm not. I just run so it keeps me out of a mental hospital, and so my wife can stand to live with me. If I'm not running, it's not worth being around me, because I'm addicted to running, and I love it. And so doing this just blew me away, and it just let me understand just how sick most of us are, because we're all over breathing.
So obviously you had to train to do that breathing style. So everyone, do not try this at home when you go running. But once you were able to do that, how different did you feel? Tell me that.
Totally, it's like totally calm. It's like you're just chilled out. Yeah. And when I'm doing my training runs, there's a certain street here. There's no lights on it, and I can run for probably 1.5 miles without any traffic lights. And it's really totally level. And when I do that on a Sunday night long run, I just feel like I could run forever, and I really kick up the pace, but I'm never feeling hard out of breath. I'm running the same pace I used to, only it's much, much, much easier.
Yeah.
I'm not the only one who's done this. There's another dentist from Colorado Springs. His name is Frank Seaman. I've never met him, but he runs up Pikes Peak with his mouth taped. Wow. I'm not making that up. You can go online and see his picture. So I just see, and I've had some of my patients, I talk about nasal breathing for running, and I've had 2 boys come in separate, don't know each other, and they were, like 10 or 11 years of age, and each of them came in and said they had taken a minute off of their mile time by running with their lips together. So yeah. When you're talking, like when you're working with young kids, this can be a highly motivating factor for your soccer player who's really, he wants to be as good as he can be. That's a motivating factor when you're working with them.
Oh, for sure. A way to get to the children's hearts and motivation is you can be a better athlete. You can even sleep better. You'll grow taller, that whole component. So when you do the marathon, is that the first time you're going to be taping your lips?
I've never taped, but I want to do it, and I'm going to do it just because I want to make a statement.
You need that shirt, close your mouth, save your life while you're running that marathon. How can we make that happen? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I will send you a shirt that says, one of my shirts that says everyone knows.
Yes. Yeah. So that's going to be, so hopefully you'll take some pictures for us all to see.
Yeah, I hope to.
Question about the orthotropics approach. So what ages does the BioBlock, what is that? What ages is it meant for? And what does the appliance look like?
Okay. It's meant for kids under age 10, and the younger you do it, the better. Practically speaking, if you're going to treat in the mixed dentition, you have to have 4 upper incisor teeth in, the permanent ones, because you carry them forward 8 or 10 millimeters. And frankly, they look pretty awkward when you do that. But then shortly after you've done this, you bring the lower jaw forward, and all of a sudden there's what I call the aha moment, when the mother looks at her child and the face is in this unbelievable balance, and they get really excited about it. And so the appliance it's just a little piece of plastic with some wire. It hooks onto the upper jaw, and has some things that cause your lower jaw, some wires where you have to posture your jaw forward. And I have I have an appliance which is not called the BioBlock. I have a patent on a variation of the BioBlock, which is more adjustable. I have a couple of wires that come down, and I put some plastic on these to engage the floor of the mouth. It's called the Adapt LGR appliance. It's an acronym that I came up with while running. ADAPT-LGR. Anterior Development and Postural Trainer, that's the Adapt-LGR. Landing Gear Reminder, like you have a landing gear in an airplane. You don't need the landing gear when you're in the air. So when you first have this appliance go in, you don't use it because the patient has to get used to it. Then when they're used to wearing it and they're not moving their jaw around all the time, you drop the landing gear reminder down and put some thermoplastic around the little wires and mold it to the floor of their mouth so that if their jaw falls back, it doesn't feel good. And so they learn to keep their jaw forward. Now, the very people that need it the most, we have to be brutally honest about this, are the ADHD kids, and there's about 15% that get diagnosed this way now. And Steve Sheldon from Chicago, head of Lurie Children's Hospital pediatric airway program, says, I do not believe, and he's written many books on this, he's a physician, I do not believe there is this thing as that ADHD exists. I believe it is always, and he uses the term always, a breathing and sleep issue. Those are the kids that are bouncing off the walls. The teachers want to kill because they won't sit still. The parents are ready to kill them because they can't stand it. They say something and it goes in one ear and out the other. And those are the ones that they need this the most. And it's very challenging for them to do it, to discipline themselves. You can get the job done, but that's the sad part. So when you look at Orthotropics, it has a very limited ability to change things. And yet it is, in my practice, it's the gold standard. And I've learned over the years, the bar of entry for me to accept a patient is pretty darn high. Mm-hmm. I like winning, and I don't like starting a patient and having them not do well with it. And there are certain red flags that we see that make me say, I don't want to do it. Or more than that, make my wife say that. Because she's a treatment coordinator, and she'll have interviewed that it's a family project. Mm-hmm. She'll have interviewed the family, and there'll be many red flags, for instance, and she'll say to me, don't even think about offering orthotropics here. There's no way it's going to work. And that comes from experience. We do the next best thing, which is to we'll often expand the arches like crazy. We routinely do that. We're expanding in the primary dentition. We routinely expand. If I'm going to put an expander in anybody, upper and lower expansion. And of course, as orthodontists, we're all taught that, and we all know there's no midline suture in the mandible. And we're taught if you push the teeth laterally, you're going to push them off the bone support. And that's been taught to us by people who have never tried. So once you get past that and you try it on your own and realize, no, you didn't push the teeth off the bone support, and golly gee, you built all this bone out here, and then the permanent teeth come into those positions and they have a much broader, width here, then you say, wow, we can do this. And if I'm going to put in expanders, I'm going to expand 10 millimeters because the screw falls apart at 11. Say we need 5, 6, 7 millimeters to get rid of the crowding teeth. I'm going to go right to the end of the screw because every bit I do is going to expand both the lower, but also the roof of the mouth, which is the floor of the nose. And any increment I get on the nose is going to be good for the airway.
Mm-hmm. And what about the AP growth? If someone doesn't tolerate the BioBlock, do you use reverse pull headgear? Or?
Well, reverse pull headgear is great, and we use it in a lot of kids, whether they're class 3 and the upper jaw is behind the lower teeth. We use it in any kind of a case, but the reverse pull headgear is best in the really young kids, 4, 5, and 6. You can launch the maxilla forward. It'll come forward like crazy with not that much wear. With increasing age, past age 10, you get diminished returns, and you get into the teenage years, and you can have somebody, and I've had them wear it nearly 24 hours a day, and you really don't get that much out of it. There are people that are wanting to do it for adults, and my experience is I haven't seen the kind of results that make me happy, and frankly, most people wouldn't wear one 24 hours a day like they basically need to do to get any kind of results. It's not a great solution for somebody, in that age group, unfortunately.
So what do you do when like around age 11 and above, when you need that forward growth, what happens?
Okay, let's say and this is the really the part that I hate. Some mom comes in with their child, the kid is 12 or 13, all the teeth are in, the permanent teeth are in, and we have a class 2 patient. Okay, there's a large overjet. Okay, what are my options? Well, I could fall back to my traditional training and give them a headgear. That's never going to happen because I wouldn't. That's, in my opinion, it should be illegal to do that. I could take out upper bicuspid teeth and bring the upper front teeth back as I was taught to do. There's not enough money in the world to make me do that. Elon Musk, if he gave me his entire fortune, the richest man in the world, to treat his child, I wouldn't do it. I cannot ethically and morally do that. So I have 2 options in this case, and that's the hard part. Here you are, a 12 or 13-year-old kid. The mother walks in with a child, and I look at them. Both jaws are back. You have to understand that. Both jaws are back in a class 2 case. So I have an option. I can do nothing, which is better than doing any of the aforementioned things, leaving someone like that. That's better. Or I can do surgery, which is lovely. It only costs north of $50,000 to $100,000, and it's not going to get paid for most of the time unless there's a sleep apnea issue. Or I can try to camouflage this, and there are ways to do that, and there are ways that I've developed over the years, and they are not the standard of care. I can move the lower teeth forward. There are ways to do just the teeth. I'm not moving the lower jaw forward. I mean, there'll be people who are going to say, well, they're going to move the lower jaw forward with such and such an appliance. Well, excuse me, I've tried all those. And I know they have a great headgear effect. And although the teeth may fit afterwards, I don't kid myself that I actually moved the lower jaw forward. There's really not any evidence to support that anyway. For instance, the Herbst appliance, there's plenty of evidence that's in the literature that this just basically brings the upper teeth back. You fix the class 2, but you don't get the face any better. So you're either going to do surgery or going to do a camouflage thing where I can push the lower teeth forward. And I have cases where I put in implants in the lower arch and added an extra tooth on the lower arch, which, if I went to peer review with that, someone's going to say, oh, these teeth you pushed them so far forward, they're going to be lost. And I'd say, well, have you seen that happen, doctor? And they haven't, because they wouldn't have tried it. And I've been doing it long enough. I know it's not going to happen. And so I can comfortably, ethically, and morally do that. And I know in the process, I'm giving someone some tongue space that they wouldn't have. And if any little increment I give them is a good thing. Just to let you know how crazy this retraction thing is. I wake up to emails from people all over the world who had this done, and many of them are desperate. So in January of this year, I had a woman contact me from Singapore, and everybody knows what using clear aligners is. Invisalign is the brand name, of course. So with that, what is frequently done, because the profession still thinks you can't advance teeth, they go in and disc the lower teeth, and they have a nice term for that. It's called slenderizing. Well, who wouldn't want to be more slender anyway, right? So it sounds like it's a cool thing. In reality, it's just going in and disking all these teeth and narrowing them, because we've taught it. We've all been taught, don't push the teeth forward because you're going to cause recession. You might lose teeth. Kept me from straightening my wife's teeth for 11 years. So here's this woman who does this, has this done, innocuous. It's done by general dentists, by orthodontists. Every day this is being done in the world somewhere. I mean, probably hundreds of times. And she then says she can't breathe. Now, who am I to say this woman in Singapore is a nutcase, that it's all in her head? Who knows her better than she knows her? She didn't have this problem before. She's changed one thing in her life, and this has happened. So my point here is, if you choose to retract, you do so at your own risk. And you have to be prepared for these things. And don't tell a patient it's not related.
Yeah.
And when you retract, and I've had this happen many times, we get into the ERRS thing, and someone gets 4 teeth taken out, and they're all pulled back, And then they complained to the orthodontist. I had this happen to a woman from a major Western city in another state who came to see me. But before she came to see me, she complained to the orthodontist who did this, and it devastated her face. It did. The orthodontist said to her, well, it's just because you're aging. Oh my. That's what you really want to say to a middle-aged woman, is that she's aging. They really make friends with that. But the point is, her face was devastated. I reopened the spaces for her. And finally, she started smiling again. Her husband came down with her and thanked me for making his wife smile for the first time in 5 years after I'd reopened the spaces for her.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk more about the ERRS. One quick thing though, how, a lot of these techniques are retractive, like you said, with a little bit of reciprocal force on
Right.
that. And I think a lot of people are probably edgy, where just a small change, a small reduction in space could maybe put them over the edge.
Exactly.
And so it just makes you really mindful of all these treatments and, what other effect, like, oh, are we growing, or what is it, angling the teeth in the wrong direction? That's, reducing even a millimeter could probably have a substantial impact. So in terms of the extraction, retraction, regret syndrome cases, how did that start? How did you evolve into creating that term?
Well, first of all, it all started in 1985. A woman came in to see me, and she'd had upper lateral incisor teeth removed. And was retracted. She had pencil thin lips. Her face looked like she'd been hit with a baseball bat. This mid face was all back. And she had a headache that was going on all the time. I mean, it was unrelenting. And I said, I'm sorry, I think you need to have the spaces open, but I don't know that it's even possible. I cannot help you. That was 1985. I sent her away. She came back in 1989 to see me, and she was desperate. And she said, you got to do this. And I thought, well, I had done some more continuing education. I was using little appliances that I could use to create space for kids when they had crowded teeth. I figured, let me try that and see if that would reopen the spaces, because I'd been taught once you close those spaces, you cannot reopen them. That's what I've been taught. Or if you did, you would literally push them off the bone support. So what did I tell her? I said, I've never seen this reported in the literature. I've never done it. I'm unaware that it's ever been done in the history of the world. But these are the things that I think might happen to you if we try. You may get recession. In her case, I said, I know I'm going to create an anterior open bite that may be only resolvable with surgery. I say, I may push the teeth so far that you lose teeth. And her response to me was, I don't care. I don't care. She's 27 years of age, and she's literally dealing with a headache that won't go away. I go to her dentist's office one evening after work, and I said, Bob, I'm going to treat Peg and reopen the spaces. What do you think? He looks at me. He says, Bill, I think you're nuts. And I said, well, that's pretty well proven I am. But let's say if I'm successful, would you restore? And he said, yeah, sure. Go ahead and do it. Try. I said, fine. So we did. And I was successful. And her face filled out dramatically. And when she went to visit her mother in Florida, where her mom lived, her mother said, oh, Peg, you've got lips now. And the headaches have been gone ever since. That changed my life. Soon thereafter, I opened a space for myself where I'd had a tooth taken on the upper left, widened my own jaw non-surgically 7 millimeters. I did that about a year after I treated her. And so that's what really got me going on this path. And I kept doing one case after another, and I got more confident about it. And I've done hundreds of them now. But then it dawned on me, as you know, when I'm out running, that's about the only time that my brain actually works. And I think of things. I came back one day, I was talking to my wife, as I always do when I come back. We're together all the time, except basically when I go run. And I came into the house and I said, Deb, I just came up with something here. I've got another acronym. I mean, like the acronym for my appliance, the ADAPT LGR, I came up with another acronym. Extraction, retraction, regret syndrome, as in mistake, you shouldn't have done it. And when I thought about it, I thought, this is kind of funny. But no, and when I present it to dental audiences, they usually laugh. And then I, with a very straight face, say, no, this isn't funny at all. It's not even close to being funny, because it's so true. And I define it as a constellation of aesthetic, how you look. Gee, your narrower smile, your cheeks are flatter, your lips are thinner, all that, those issues. Aesthetic, functional, gee, someone's clicking and popping, as often will happen. And I have graphics to show why that happens. Aesthetic, functional, and emotional signs and symptoms. It's a triad, and you have to understand that. And so, depending on how long this person's had the issue, the emotional aspect can get to be monstrous. And that's a huge thing. And I learned the hard way in treating some people who are this way. No matter what you do, after 20 or 30 years of them suffering, spending literally hundreds of thousands of dollars, and many have, considering suicide, as many have, no matter what you do, they're damaged goods and they're never going to be okay. That's a very small minority. But most of them, when you reopen the spaces and give them the tongue space, they come back and they want more. And often in the midst of treatment, they'll say, "Oh my gosh, this is great. Can you give me more?" It's like I make the analogy of a taste of honey. Well, that's great. Now give me the whole thing. I'll eat all that honey. Or a potato chip. No, give me the bag. I'll eat the whole thing. They want more tongue space. Their tongue has lived in a small space, and now when they get a little space, it's crazy. And then I get the, "Oh, by the way, Dr. Hang," comments that, "Gee, I used to get 3 or 4 sinus infections a year, and I haven't gotten any now that I've reopened spaces. Or I used to fall off the treadmill because I had poor balance. My balance is great now." Or that I've had numbness in my hands and feet that went away. And these are, I think, many of them are changing from sympathetic nervous system issues to parasympathetic issues. And I don't pretend to understand why they all happen. But it's not like I sit there and tell people, "Oh, tell me all the great things that have happened since I started doing this." That's never the case. They offer these things on their own.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it makes perfect sense. More space, more airway, more oxygen, better sleep, breathing. I mean, that's life. Do you think extractions are ever warranted?
Let's just answer that question. I have been practicing now for 40 years and not found the reason to take out teeth. And if anything, I deal with a patient population that is far more challenging to treat than most people do. So I don't take out teeth. And I don't, if someone had a little bit of gum recession, and I say this in advance to them, if you get some recession, you're not going to lose your teeth from that. And I tell them this in advance. They'd rather have the big smile. They'll do anything. Many of them will do anything they can to change what they've had. They can't wait to have something done. Sometimes, I mean, I had a woman from Springfield, Massachusetts, come to see me several years ago, and she sent me a 3-ring binder with 6 different sections in it, hundreds of pictures, sections on dentistry, ENT, orthodontics, psychiatric stuff, plastic surgical sections, pictures of her before the treatment and after. And the title of the whole thing was "My ERRS Study." She'd seen my stuff online, and she says, "I am an ERRS sufferer." So when someone identifies as that, then maybe what I came up with, the ERRS, is a very real thing, and I believe it is a real syndrome. It's something that tends to, syndrome is nothing more than a bunch of signs and symptoms that tend to occur together all at the same time. And when you find a lot of people there, then you say, "Hey, this seems to be a pattern."
Mm-hmm.
The good news about this syndrome is that it is preventable because you don't have to retract. Well, so this woman sends me this, and she sent me 2 copies, one to me and one to the front desk, as if I needed 2 of them. And it came on a Saturday when I was doing my mini residency, and on Sunday I read the entire thing, Sunday evening. I couldn't believe the emotion this woman had, and I thought the bar of success for her will be impossible. There's no way I'm going to make her happy. She had the treatment when she was 14. She's in her early 30s. She's not married, and I understand that dynamic really, really, really well. So there are a ton of red flags. So I didn't know it, but that next Tuesday, she comes to my office in person from Massachusetts, dressed to the nines like crazy, walks in here and like, "Oh my God, I finally met Dr. Hang." And my wife and I had discussed this whole thing, and my wife's my treatment coordinator. And so I just thought, I will regret treating this woman because her expectation is so high. I don't think I want to treat her. So she's flown all the way out here, and we talked with her. Said, I don't know that I can really help you because I think you're going to require surgery, and I don't think you're up for that. She says, Dr. Hang, if you just reopen my spaces, I promise I'll be happy. So outside the room, my wife and I discussed it, and we agreed because we're warm-hearted people, want to help people. Deb went back in and said to her, Dr. Hang has agreed to treat you. Her face lit up, and she said, and I'm not joking, her exact words, this is the best day of my life. I made the appliances, I started the process, and within a few weeks, she's sending me pictures via email of how her teeth are moving, how happy she is, with a bunch of exclamation points. She turned out to be the best patient I've ever reopened the spaces for, and I couldn't have been happier to have been part of it. And I really got to know her well. It's fun to do what I do. The sad part is I want to stop producing people like that. It's not okay. I'm sorry. We need to come back, step back. Let's get rid of the emotion here. We've had arguments in dentistry for forever, but realize we don't have much science behind what we do. When you really look at it, there's very little science behind most of what's done in dentistry. So we need to listen to the patients. They know more than we do.
And that's one of my questions is, what is your biggest wish for change in the orthodontic profession, the dental profession?
I believe, and the reason I came up with the ortho to health thing is it focuses, O2 means oxygen, and orthodontics. It's a different profession. If you want to get straight teeth, fine. Go to an orthodontist and get your teeth straight. If your worth in life is that you have perfectly straight lower incisors, well, good luck with that. How many kids don't wear the retainers? And they crowd up when they go off to college and stop wearing the retainers anyway. My wish is that we cut out the emotion. Let's look, we're here to serve the public. We need to learn about that kid who's going to have brain damage. Ron Harper, PhD neurobiologist at UCLA, has documented with MRI studies Purkinje cells in the cerebellum affecting motor coordination. Phil Cooper, African-American dentist friend of mine in Savannah, Georgia, has written a book entitled Why African-American Kids Can't Read. It has nothing to do with the color of their skin. He talks about how by the time they reach school, many of them have brain damage because of sleep apnea, and they're not going to read well. And these are issues. We can't allow this for our children. We have to understand this is real. We have a huge segment of the population who are like this. You've got many physicians that are out there. I can give you their names: David Gozal, Steve Sheldon, John Remmers. A ton of these people who know all these issues, and they are not happy with what goes on. The biggest name, Christian Gimeno, he passed away soon to be 3 years in July of this year. He was one, and he spoke at a meeting. I heard him speak at an Airway orthodontic meeting, and he said, you can kill a 12-year-old boy with a headgear. That's his words, not mine. And then he also, with his French accent, said, you have to stop pulling teeth. Now, who is Christian Gimeno? Well, he's somebody, let's put it that way. He came up with the whole sleep apnea thing, has over 400 articles published in the refereed literature, and he knows the subject better than anybody. So maybe we ought to listen to a guy like that who's treating these people and has been for all those years. I need to see the profession become a profession and become part of healthcare instead of, I can line up teeth.
Yeah.
Before I got on this talk, I literally got a magazine. It's an orthodontic magazine, a throwaway journal. I looked in it, and here's a picture where they put out a case, and they say, how are you going to treat it? Now, everyone there was going to take out teeth for the case. Everyone, all these people.
It's like, how do we get this information out there? With that ADA policy in October 2017 that all dentists should be screening, and I know there's progress will be made there. I did read some article that said that dentists might be subject to lawsuits if they're not screening. Did you hear that information?
I didn't hear that, and I hate to see it come to that. But what does it take? You know what? Are we healthcare practitioners or not? A dentist, can you look at a little kid walking in your office and see that he has his mouth hanging open? Can you see dark circles under his eyes? I mean, it isn't rocket science to figure it out. Someone who's trained can see the problem at 50 yards, for God's sakes. You don't even have to have the kid in the chair.
Exactly.
And you can make the referral in a nanosecond. Even it doesn't mean you have to treat,
Right.
but you need to have a team of people to refer to. And your group, the myofunctional therapy group, you're in the front lines. You're the most important group. If they get to me, by the time they get to me, it's more of an orthodontic issue. And if you can get that child, take care of the tongue tie, help that mother breastfeed, that's more valuable than anything.
Yeah. And to me, it seems so clear that when there is sleep disordered breathing, there's an anatomical component. You can see it, you can see narrow palate, dental crowding, recessed jaws, scalloped tongue. I mean, they're mouth breathing. It's like almost like a checklist of any of these features. It shouldn't be that hard to identify. Here we have a problem. So, but you did mention myofunctional therapy. I'd love to ask you, obviously you're a proponent. So could you just talk a little bit about your thoughts on the role of myofunctional therapy in all of this?
Okay. It's ironic because you have to understand my background. When I was a kid, I wore braces. They took out 2 teeth for me. And the orthodontist said, you're a tongue thruster. Here, do these exercises. And that was it. And I thought, tongue thrust, what's that all about? So I took it was a little white card of some exercise I was supposed to do. And I went home, and what did I do? Well, I'm a Midwestern boy. I played basketball after school. That's all we had to do in Illinois, where I grew up. Never really thought about it. Went to dental school. They talked about tongue thrust. I saw the head of the orthodontic department, and I said, I know I'm a tongue thruster. I was told I was. What should I do? He says, oh, make yourself a retainer. Maybe your teeth won't move. So I made a retainer and wore it around. And then I realized my teeth aren't moving. I threw it in my dresser drawer. 6 months later, I found it, put it in. It still fit. My teeth hadn't moved. Then I got into orthodontic training. And now I'm in the midst of the whole thing, because there we were. This was back in the days of Dan Garliner in Coral Gables, Florida. Now, Dan Garliner in the orthodontic community was persona non grata. He was the guy who he was like selling elephant repellent. Okay. Okay, I'm going to sell you this elephant repellent. I'm on the back of my truck here. I'm selling elephant repellent, and people are buying it from me. But someone says, "Well, wait a minute. There aren't any elephants. You don't have to worry about that. No matter. You still need my elephant repellent." And the point here is, that was viewed as being a charlatan. And one of the guys that was was an instructor in my program. His wife was a speech and language pathologist. And they really badmouthed Garliner. So that's what I grew up with. But then I got into the profession. And then I started to learn, and I met John Mew, and I learned about rest oral posture. Then I moved to California and met Joy Moeller and Barbara Green, who slowly educated me, sometimes faster than I really jumped on because by then I was really, oh my God, because I've actually been looking for a myofunctional therapist, but didn't have anybody. And so with them, I've learned so much over the years. And they were the ones who taught me about tongue tie. I had no clue about that. And now it's been at least 15 years since they taught me about it. And I just shake my head, because not only is it important for the young kids to get that tongue to the palate and to be able to nurse, but the implications, the patients that I've had who've had horrible headache patterns, adults, one 63-year-old woman, for instance, who'd been clenching her teeth, and she talked about banging her head against the wall at age 6 in a farmhouse in Iowa where she grew up, trying to get rid of her migraine headaches. And when she had the tongue tie release, this is what she said. I was driving my car from the surgeon's office over to Joy's office. I was driving my car with my right hand and holding my jaw with my left. I thought my jaw was going to fall off. And 3 months later, she's sitting in the chair with me in the office shaking her head, how would my life have been like had someone recognized this early on? This has ruined my life. It's ruined my marriage. And now here I am. I don't have any pain, and I don't clench anymore. It was literally something that released all the tension in her entire shoulder girdle. And that's not the only one that I've heard like that. And I mean, it's an instant thing. And so for those who are only looking at the tongue tie for the young kid, how many mothers are out there, and even fathers, who are dealing with these issues, and I've seen them get the instant relief. And in order to make it work, you're part of that team, because you got to do the exercises before, you got to mobilize it, and then keep them exercising to really make it from scarring down again.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel like just about every orthodontic case has an underlying myofunctional disorder, or like that soft tissue dysfunction is the cause of the malocclusion?
If you have a malocclusion, you don't have proper restoral posture. It's a given. If they had proper restoral posture, their teeth would be perfect, their face would be perfect, their airway would be perfect, and I've seen those patients in almost 26 years of practice here. I've seen a handful of people who are like that. But then again, why do those people come in to see me anyway? Some of them have been siblings that I've recognized of another a mouth breathing patient who I'm treating, and I see the brother. I got one in mind, and he's the handsomest guy ever. And I measured John Mew's number, and it's literally on the money. I put the Bolton norm on his face, and it's perfect. I mean, and his teeth never need me. Those are rare. Those are really rare. So anybody who's got a malocclusion, they need myo. Sad part is most people who are myofunctional therapists, they get the referral after the case fails. Everything's been done. The orthodontist has done his best to make teeth fit on jaws that don't fit. The malocclusion is horrible. They run rubber bands, pull the teeth together, take out teeth, try to make them fit, avoid jaw surgery. And then when the open bite comes back, they say to the child, "Oh, you have a tongue thrust. Unless you learn to keep your tongue in your upright position, this case will never be stable." And yet everything that's been done makes it virtually impossible for that kid to get their tongue to the palate, because now the maxilla has been made narrower, smaller, retraction has been done, the tongue is further back in the face, and now it's like you're charged with trying to get this child to have proper restoral posture, and you're basically trying to put out a forest fire with a squirt gun, and it's not going to happen. That's why the referral needs to be made right away. You need to see the kid in a primary dentition as soon as the problem is noted. That's when you need to be at it.
As early as possible. Exactly. Even if in infancy there's issues noticed.
Absolutely.
Like that saying, in the war between muscle and bone, muscle will always win, and muscle is shaping the bone. So when we see that malocclusion, we know there is some underlying soft tissue dysfunction that triggered that. Of course, there's some genetic parts, but we know that the soft tissue. So I know we have to start to wrap up. There's a couple things. We do have a little surprise pop up with Dr. Hockle, because you are treating Dr. Hockle. And one of my things I was going to ask you is, I know when you and I have spoken before, you said you have a lot of patients that they need jaw surgery, and it takes years for patients to, I'm not talking about Dr. Hockle's case, but patients to come to terms with that. And people spend tons of money trying to find other ways when that's really the ultimate resolution in most cases. And so I know you're treating Dr. Hockle for his upcoming jaw surgery. And so I did a little recording with him. So we want to show that. And then also there's a few questions. So Renata, what do you think is best to order? Show Dr. Hockle and then address the questions if we have time?
Yes, and I do want to do a quick announcement for everybody who's watching this. We have over 20 people on Facebook. If you think that this information is important, if you think that more people should know about this, please help us. We put Airway Circle together to try to reach as many people as we can, because we do feel like there's so many people out there that need help. So you can help us by sharing this video on your personal timeline, on your groups of other professionals or friends or moms. You can also help by joining Airway Circle. We have a membership, and it's $25 a month. And you get access to all of these amazing talks that we have with speakers from all over the world. So you can learn, and you can help us keep bringing these things over to you. With that being said, I am going to share my screen. Let me know if you guys can see it.
All right. Hello, everybody. I am so excited that I have Dr. Hockle here with me today as a special guest. I saw a post on Facebook on April 1st which we all thought it was a joke, but it wasn't, that Dr. Hang was with Dr. Hockle, putting braces on, and Dr. Hockle said he's going to have some jaw surgery coming up, and we all said, oh no, funny joke, haha, but actually it wasn't a joke. So I had to bring Dr. Hockle here to talk about his upcoming procedures. As you all probably know, Dr. Hockle is a very wonderful general dentist up in Northern California that is actually focused on airway orthodontic treatment. He was trained and mentored specifically by Dr. Hang starting in 2004. And we all know Dr. Hockle due to this advanced focus in airway treatment orthodontics. He's been on Airway Circle podcast or Airway Circle before, doing wonderful presentations. So if you want to take it away, Dr. Hockle, just give a little bit of introduction about who you are, and then we'll go over a few questions that I have for you.
Sure. Well, as you said, I'm a general dentist in Walnut Creek, California, and I started out doing a lot of restorative and cosmetic dentistry in my career, starting in 1989. Throughout the 90s, started learning the principles of orthodontics, but didn't start until about 1999. So I had 10 years of really solid general practice only. And then over the next decade, sort of blended the two, orthodontics and general dentistry, restorative, cosmetic, and got to the point where now all I'm doing is the orthodontics. And I have associates who help with the general dentistry. But the focus has been entirely on preservation, treatment, and prevention of airway problems. So it's been a great journey, and I'm more excited about what I do now than I ever have been.
Yeah, it's really, really saving lives. And what is your upcoming treatment? What's going on with you?
So this is something I wanted to do for a long time. I really, probably since the early days, I learned about the options of doing orthodontic surgery as in the way that it can be done, should be done when it's done really well. It was attractive to me. But I think, like a lot of other people, I had this idea, well, I don't know if I really need to go that far. I'm going to try the more conservative things, and did some orthodontics to open up spacing in my mouth using a sagittal appliance, and used sleep apnea appliances, various kinds, because I knew that there was something mild going on. I didn't have a lot of symptoms, but I knew that looking at my profile, I was very prone to having airway issues. And there isn't a one-to-one correlation here, but if you look at how my profile was, looking from the side there, it might look like kind of a normal profile. But if you compare it to, this is me at age 8, compare it to where I should have been at that age, I was pretty far behind the line. And I know he loves me, but my dad treated me with a headgear and other appliances that were in effect retractive, pulling teeth backward. And so by later on in life, it kept going more in that direction. So that's when I was about 50. And then now it's not that different, but when anyone has their jaws as far back as I do, there's going to be a greater risk that there isn't going to be room for the tongue and the airway behind the teeth. I mean, you've only got so much room between the neck bones and the front teeth. And my airway is pretty small. And so I knew all along there was the risk there. I did sleep studies and took a look at what the actual numbers were. They weren't huge. I just noticed here 10 years ago, I think I had an AHI of about 10. And so that's why I was starting to play around with it. Right now, it's only about 5.5. But I feel like I have to sleep in a way so that my head is tilted back in order to keep my airway open. And I have a forward head posture I've had all my life. And that's not going to change overnight. But I just got to the point where I was looking at the imaging of the airway and thinking about this whole thing. I just wanted to be as definitive as I could at this age. I'm 61 now, and I didn't want to be 71 or 81 thinking, back then I probably could have done jaw surgery and opened up the airway more. But I just got to the point where I thought, I've got to do this. I've been thinking about it for over 10 years. Using as my excuse that who would see my patients for the month of downtime while I'm recovering. And I just ran out of excuses. I mean, I thought I had someone lined up twice to do that, and it hasn't worked out. So I don't know how it'll work out, but I just trust that it will, because I know I need to go in that direction. So I told Dr. Hang, I'm ready to do this. We got to do this. And he said, come on down, let's get your braces on. And here I am.
Nice. There you go. Looking good. And did you feel like this is something you've thought about for a while and just kind of like for years, or how long were you considering this orthodontic surgery?
I'm sure over 10 years I've considered it, and just didn't really. I think it was mainly my excuse for what am I going to do during the downtime in the practice. If somebody had said, "Here, we'll just take over and run your life while you're gone," then I probably would have done it a long time ago. But I think this is true for a lot of patients, that the idea floats around, you compare it to this option, to that option, and at some point, it just kind of all comes together and a certain treatment option makes sense. It may not be surgery, maybe something else makes sense, but it's big decisions and it takes a lot of considering options. Some people stay in that considering options stage forever. And I mean, like they never do anything.
Yeah.
And I got to the point that I didn't want to wait for it to be any more severe. And 10 years of considering the option was enough. Time to just do it.
And I think that's not uncommon at all. Like you said, people, what's that saying? Paralysis by analysis. So there's so many options, and surgery can be scary for so many people that people spend so much money, years and years, trying all different things to avoid the inevitable, in many cases.
Yeah. Well, I tell my patients, if you go on the internet and you start searching MMA to treat sleep apnea, you're going to see a lot of negative stuff, pretty much all of which I agree with, because it's predicated on surgery that's being done. I don't know if the wrong way is too strong of a way to say it, but I think that it's not done in a way that optimizes the result most of the time. So to me, I knew that with a good surgeon I trusted completely, and having seen patients almost every day in my office, I have patients who've either done the surgery and we're finishing up, or we're getting them ready for the surgery. And I just see so many of them come back and brag about their big airway and how well they're sleeping. And I see that side of it as a practitioner, and not just the, whatever negative side of it someone might see just by doing an internet search. I think that biased me.
True. And we're all going to be jealous of your big airway when you're done. So
I hope.
So how do you feel? Are you nervous, excited? What are your feelings?
I'm very excited about it. I'm not really nervous. Maybe I should be, but I have no fear of the surgery itself from having seen so many people go through it. It was a bit of a hassle the last few weeks dealing with braces and food getting stuck everywhere. But hey, it makes me more sympathetic for my patients. I think it's the third time at least that I've had fixed appliances on my teeth. So it's not a brand new thing, but it's been many years, and it's an adjustment. So, but other than just the slight hassle of being careful when I eat, it really has left me feeling very good about the whole process.
Yeah, just jumping and taking that first step. So what is just the timeline, just the upcoming plan?
Well, the first step's going to be alignment of the teeth, and that's going to take a good 4 to 6 months or so. And then it's going to be expansion, widening out upper and lower. And that's going to take at least 3 to 4 months or so. So I don't expect before the end of the year or early next year, I'll be ready for the surgery itself. My joints are in good condition, so we're not talking about total joint procedures. That speeds it up a little bit. And right now, I'm open to getting as much expansion on the lower as I can with dental alveolar expansion. So I'm using an expander attached to the teeth. And then if I can't get that much expansion on the upper, I'm happy having Dr. Movahead do the actual expansion during the surgery.
Okay, that sounds good. So if you can just keep us posted, maybe we'll check back in every so often and just follow your case, because, a lot of us are jealous. You're taking that next step to better airway health. So it's a really big congratulations for you.
Thank you. I'm happy to keep you posted.
Thank you. Thanks so much for being here. Totally appreciate all of your information and support for everyone.
Thank you, Nicole. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Ta-da! That was wonderful. Thank you, Nicole.
One thing I just want to say is that Dr. Hockle and I decided we're going to document his journey throughout this whole process. So every time he has a new stage in his treatment, we're going to record for Airway Circle, and we'll show that. And he thought it would be a really great way also to look back on this whole process for everyone and himself.
Yay. I love that. Thank you, Nicole. Back to you guys.
Yeah, so I think we can just wrap everything up now. I just really appreciate you being here with us, Dr. Hang. Renata, I don't know in terms of questions, if there's time to look at any of the questions or how you want to handle that.
It's up to Dr. Hang. Would you
No,
like
I'm,
to answer?
no, I'm fine to have questions. I want to add one thing to Brian. Brian's my dear friend. He's taken the many residents. He's here every time for every meeting, and so we're really very close. And the fact of the matter is, untreated sleep apnea is good for a 20% reduction in your ride here on planet Earth. And I think Brian has known that. Brian's very bright. He gets it. And so you get to that point where you say, you know what? I don't need that heart attack or stroke. Doesn't fit into my game plan. And you say, I've got to do something. As many people will never do it because they're scared to death. I've actually seen somebody who's been told 20 years ago to do it. He's still not done it.
Yeah.
So there is a question that came from Facebook by Nicole Colley. She said, how do we know when a child is too old to obtain success of growing the lower jaw? Is it a certain age, start of puberty, full-blown puberty, or when the child is done growing, etc.?
It really relates to, in my opinion, there's one approach which is predictably going to bring the face forward. There are many that are going to say they will, and I don't believe that they do. So using the orthotropics approach, which I think is the only way that really can do it, it's a technical thing and a behavioral thing. And we kind of make the upper limit around age 10. To do it well, I want to have a lot of primary teeth present rather than all the permanent teeth. There are some girls, particularly at age 9, who've got all their permanent teeth in, and it makes it very challenging for a lot of technical reasons to do that. And I've pushed that envelope. I actually got a girl right now in treatment who's 12, and I'm doing it, but she's got a very delayed eruption pattern. If we can get them and they still have primary teeth and they're highly motivated and they're not worried about how they look, because they're going to look a little bit awkward for a while, then we can do it up to age 11 or 12, but that's an outlier. Most of the time you're talking age 10, and it really doesn't relate to puberty at all. I mean, we've had this whole thing, treat orthodontically and do a wrist x-ray and see if the patient is going through a period of rapid growth. To me, that's total silliness. It doesn't relate to anything. You can treat a kid, and I believe the ideal age is in the primary dentition. That's where I want to put all my effort in the future. I wish I had an answer for the kid who's got all of his teeth in, but there's not great options. There really isn't.
Would you like to ask one, Nicole?
Sure. Let's see. Somebody is asking about an adult expansion. Thoughts on, I don't know if this person, what someone is, do you see that post?
Yes. I asked them to be a little bit more specific about what kind of treatment they're talking about. I think this is almost the same question from Gina. If it is too late for teens or adults to grow the lower jaw forward, does positioning the lower jaw forward have any benefits?
Positioning it forward, I mean, there are people who voluntarily position their lower jaw forward all the time just by holding it out there. And they'll usually tell you they do it because they breathe better. But in terms of getting it to go out there and stay out there, that's a big challenge in terms of orthodontics. John Mew and Mike Mew are my good friends. They talk about, and John would treat adults. I think Mike has done some. And John would be more than happy to take an adult, and he has. And I believe that he can get some help for them. It's not that much, and it's a lot of effort. And wearing these very awkward appliances, from a technical perspective and from a practical perspective, most people are not going to do it. So the sad part, and there's a ton of stuff out on the internet, and I really that purport to grow the face, and I don't want to be the person who's negative about these things. Let's just put it this way. I know what's out there, and I choose not to use it for a whole lot of reasons. It really has to do with my sleep more than anything. When I sleep at night, I got to know that I'm doing the best thing that I would do for somebody, as if they were my own family member. That makes me sleep at night. There's only one standard of care, that which I would give a family member, period. That's it in my practice and always has been. So I wish for the person who can come up with a way to develop the entire face forward, without doing surgery. Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, will look like a pauper in comparison to this person, because the entire Western world could benefit from this. All of us who have faces that are farther back from our ancestors, it would be great. But I've thought of a lot of different things. I've had ideas that I spent more than $10,000 20 years ago on a concept that I thought might work. But I had to abandon it because it required having batteries in an appliance in the mouth. And nobody is going to should have a battery in there, even if it's encapsulated on their body. That I could get into a whole other discussion about electromagnetic radiation, which is a monster issue for people today. And that could take up tons of time, which we can't get into that.
One other question is, when do you know you can stop expansion in a kid with a palatal expander? So is there a certain width, intermolar distance that you're aiming for?
John Mew likes to say, for you to comfortably get your tongue to the palate and keep it there at rest, you need a 40 to 42 millimeter intermolar width. I expanded my own maxilla back in the 90s, 31, 32 years ago. I expanded it 7 millimeters as I opened up a space where I'd had a bicuspid taken out for orthodontics when I was 11. I have a 36 millimeter intermolar width. And John didn't come up with this number until, the last 10 or 15 years, I think. I happen to believe he's right, based on my own experience here with other patients and with me. Taping my mouth at night, I know that I posture my tongue between my teeth to get it out of my throat. That's how I breathe. And if I had more intermolar width, that would be lovely. I think the wider is better. I've seen patients who have 45 millimeter intermolar width and they still have apnea, and because their face is all back, which is literally why I came up with the thing. I was actually hearing Christian Gimeno speak at an AACP meeting in Salt Lake City many years ago, and he was talking about expansion, which I'm totally into expansion. But I was frustrated because that's all he was saying. It was expansion. I leaned over to a guy I knew, and I'm always in the back row where I'm not obvious. I like to be able to disappear if need be. And I leaned over to my friend and said, you cannot expand your way out of an anterior posterior problem. And that's what it is. And that's what's going to be a limiting factor in what we're going to be able to do. And I don't think, I want everyone on this call to know, I have my total failures when I'm doing this. I've currently got a guy right now who had 4 teeth taken out, pulled back, and he had horrible apnea. He's had double jaw surgery, the maximum amount that you can possibly move forward. He got better dramatically after that, and yet he wasn't out of the woods. So after he's had this done, and I never have done this before, I reopened his 4 extraction spaces for him, giving him additional width. He still has a problem. He's had a tongue tie release. He's had myofunctional therapy. He's done everything right, and he still has a problem. Now, that's the kind of experience I have, and I can sit back, being my age, and say, wow, I had a lot of experience with this, but there's so much we don't know. And this gets into the muscle tonicity thing. He's done the myo, so hopefully his muscle tonicity is as good as it's going to get, and yet it still collapses. There are other issues that are going on. Pat McBride, my good friend, talks about vitamin D and all this stuff. She works for Inspire, and where the hypoglossal nerve stimulator. We're still in our infancy here. It's a great thing. For all of those you who are out here listening to me and you're young people, you've got the world by the tail, because there's so much in the future to change. And it'll be fun to look back in 10 years and look back on a podcast like this and say, oh, wow, those people were really antiquated, weren't they? And I hope someone says that. I really do, because that will mean we've made a lot of progress.
Yeah. And it's also just to vouch again for early intervention. We've got to treat and fix these things as early as possible, because the longer it goes on, then you get these patients like the man you're talking about. I don't know his age, but there's damage done to the mechanoreceptors, right? That there's tissue damage, neurological damage that occurs from snoring and from turbulence, from airflow resistance. That's
Right.
probably not fixable. There's parts of that you can work on muscle tone, you can work on the skeletal components, but the long-term damage may not be reversible. So we got to get these kids, fix them, get them fixed early when we see signs of dysfunction. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Hang. It's
I'm glad to have the invitation, Nicole, and I wish all of you the best. And don't hesitate to contact me.
And just know, I believe Renata said there's like 20 people on this, but once we post this later, we usually get over 1,000 views. So this will be a really big one. So we really appreciate all this information.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hang. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.